Hormuz slowly reopening. But if we don't achieve that within the next few weeks, as we start to move towards really a critical tipping point in terms of global energy supplies, then all the scenarios that open up get much more ugly, both macroeconomically, in terms of markets, and geopolitically, because it shows that Iran is prepared to really just sit there and let the world suffer.
There is volatility in markets, but would you consider that investors are betting that de-escalation remains the most likely scenario in the Middle East?
They must be when you look at markets at all-time highs in country after country, when we are talking at the same time potentially about the oil running out for country after country within a matter of weeks or months. Those two are completely incompatible.
Investors, though, taking signs from Donald Trump, for instance, posting today that he wants to give peace a chance in the ongoing negotiations with Iran?
Well, we seem to have a series of Taco Tuesdays in terms of Trump taking a step back on a Tuesday and then escalating again into the weekend. I would imagine the same plan or the same process is going to play out here again and again. But, markets look through that all and, as you said, still keep thinking this will end well, because if it doesn't, the consequences are potentially so serious they don't want to try and price that in.
As we wait, the lost production tally for Brent crude climbs ever higher. Is it clear exactly what, or whether there is a timeline that would tip investors and markets to price in a more pessimistic scenario?
Well, apart from headlines which say, fighting has restarted again, which tends to rock markets, the overall trend seems to be that they will do whatever it takes not to accept how serious this is.
What is your base case for the outlook?
At the moment, we think within another few weeks, the slightly greater than 50%, therefore base case probability, is that the combination of US pressure and what we had expected would be a further military escalation to try to de-escalate the situation on US terms, combined with an Iranian fear of having to shut in their oil production, which could permanently damage their wellheads such that they don't have the same energy industry on the other side of the war that they had going into it, would see some kind of messy deal done where the US would win on points if it was a boxing match. Iran would say we won, the US would say they won, but they would get most of what they needed to achieve in terms of, for example, uranium handed over to Russia to look after, which isn't ideal, but it's better than Iran having it in US eyes, and Hormuz slowly reopening. But if we don't achieve that within the next few weeks, as we start to move towards really a critical tipping point in terms of global energy supplies, then all the scenarios that open up get much more ugly, both macroeconomically, in terms of markets, and geopolitically, because it shows that Iran is prepared to really just sit there and let the world suffer rather than reopen and do a deal. And the US, equally for its part, isn't prepared to back off, isn't prepared to walk away because it's so important to them, and they're prepared to keep Hormuz closed longer.
Is it clear to you that Donald Trump and the United States does want this to end soon?
That's an open question. They keep saying that they want it to end soon. You wonder why, for example, they didn't start the blockade on Iran much earlier, if that's what they wanted. And there is certainly a view out there, which I'm not saying is mine, to be abundantly clear, but it's interesting to at least raise it in a forum like this for those who haven't heard it, that regardless of what's said publicly, the US actually is a net winner from this situation, at least compared to others. They're exporting more energy than anybody else. They are certainly seeing higher inflation. And you think of it like this: if you were going to have a boxing match with somebody and you said, you can cut off 3 fingers from my left hand, which nobody in their right mind would want to do, but I get to cut off your right arm, and then you have a boxing match, do you think your odds have improved of winning that boxing match? And that's the kind of standoff that you're seeing at the moment, potentially.
In the past, you've talked to us about Donald Trump's grand plan or economic statecraft. Ultimately, it's about getting more production onshore in the United States, increasing its trade, its exports. Is what the United States is doing in Iran at the moment still within the realms of Donald Trump's grand plan?
Oh, 100%. Of course, he has to win. Otherwise, it isn't part of the plan. But it was logical to us, following Venezuela, which we also flagged in advance, that he would go in, change the government, and then redirect those oil flows away from China to himself and to allies, which he has done, that Iran, with its threat of a nuclear weapon in the background, would be the next target. Because if Iran is a domino that can topple or be flipped like Venezuela, all of that Middle Eastern oil and energy nexus is effectively under a US umbrella. It's effectively backing the dollar as a currency. if that were to happen. Now, I'm reducing the argument, hugely to a bullet point, but if the US loses, it's much, much worse for it, obviously.
Is there any evidence that the US is coming under pressure from its allies, such as Australia, behind closed doors, who are now having to try to source fuel and fertiliser and other important commodities and reorganise their supply chains as well in very short time to keep their economies running?
Honestly, so far it appears no. Most governments, at least in Western economies, are still trying to say everything will be okay. Occasionally giving a warning and then saying carry on as normal, which isn't sending that signal to the White House. There may be secret messages that I'm, not cognizant of where they are complaining to them. But the general stance still seems to be, well, we hope this is all over soon, rather than pointing a finger at DC, because they know that actually won't help given the, the personality of the White House.
Can you give us a sense of the flavour of concerns from businesses in Australia you've been engaging with during this visit?
Well, I think the general approach from businesses is they can't believe that other people aren't noticing just how serious this could potentially be. Because let's say the war were to finish tomorrow, there will be a lag of months before fuel supplies and key commodity supplies return to normal. But were we, and this is hypothetical, were we to see an extended closure of Hormuz for weeks and weeks and weeks ahead, the entire Asia-Pacific region finds itself in a very, very difficult position. And of course, that would affect everybody. And yet, if you look around you on Main Street, on the high street, in restaurants, and even in some businesses, there's still an approach that this will certainly turn out okay because we don't want to consider how ugly it could be on the other side, which is a human reaction, but I'm not sure if it's the right market reaction.
It's been confirmed today that the government will commit funds in next week's budget to increase permanent fuel reserves in Australia. But you're talking about a pinch point coming within months. How do you see the impact on Australia from the dwindling fuel supply situation?
Well, let's put it like this. I'm not trying to comment on a critique on any government's policy in any country in particular. Fuel reserves are a very good idea. Critical reserves of lots of key materials are generally a good idea. And the economies that have prepared them are better placed for this kind of crisis than the ones that hadn't. But generally speaking, you do that ahead of a crisis, not during one, because if Australia is going to build up a reserve of those key fuels, other people have to be reducing their reserves. So on a net basis globally, we're just seeing a transfer from one hand to another, which means that the price would still be exceptionally high in the market unless Australia is going to close itself off from the rest of the world, which I don't think it is.
Michael Every, good to speak to you.